Hi everyone, I'm Anthony O'Flynn. If you haven't had a chance to have a look at the Paradigm Shift Summit website, check it out, paradigmshift.com.au. We've just updated the website and done some rebranding there, so have a look at what's happening. We'll also be making some more announcements about the presenters at the event very soon. The second round, just getting some things finalised and organised to make many different announcements actually. So stay tuned for all that. And if you're not on the newsletter, sign up for the newsletter because we've just had a really massive special, a big sale for the tickets for the event for this year. This will be the 6th time we're running the event. And this year it's going to be on the Sunshine Coast, 17th to the 19th of June at Mantra-Mooloolaba on the Sunshine Coast. And if you're considering flying from within Queensland and even a lot of regional areas in Australia, check out Bonza, the new airline, which is actually flying from a lot of different destinations to Sunshine Coast Airport, which is about half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour, something like that, to Mooloolaba. So have a look, and quite affordable prices. I was quite surprised, so check that out. So this week, in Australia, we saw the passing of very famous and talented comedian Barry Humphries. And just looking back at some of the clips of his work and his incredible Aquarian genius that he had, it's quite surprising that he too was the victim of cancel culture in this extremist, left, indoctrinated spectrum of political views that we're seeing pervade the landscape of Australian politics more and more now, which seems at times completely unhinged. And this really became evident with the fact that the Melbourne Comedy Festival actually had an award called the Barry that they gave to up-and-coming comedian at the event. And after his comments in 2016, he declared that those who undergo gender reassignment surgery are, quote, mutilated men. And obviously Barry himself was very famous for his character, Dame Edna Everage, and he was having one of the key roles in establishing the actual festival in the beginning. He really supported, because Barry actually was originally from Melbourne. And he then had this, after he made those statements, they actually removed the reward under his name. They removed his name from the reward. And then basically he was regarded as his comments as being controversial. And this cancel culture that we're actually seeing today, and I should make it clear that the spokespeople from the Comedy Festival have actually said that they never cancelled him. Originally, they were actually not going to honour him with his passing, but now they've done a massive backflip on that, and they are going to honour him. But basically, he had this big role in actually founding the festival. And the issue here is, and this is not a defence of Barry Humphries' views, but it's this woke, extremist, left-wing view of cancelling people and their opinions if they don't agree with the indoctrinated agenda. And we've seen this time and time again. Even just yesterday, or even today, Tucker Carlson has had his actual departed from Fox News after being one of the most successful broadcast journalists in all of US. And we're seeing it again and again, that if your views diverge from what the agenda is, then you're effectively cancelled. And the issue here is that this creeping fascist tendency with this Orwellian thought and this Orwellian language that we see more and more appear in mainstream media, in everyday language, is actually always the inversion of what is actually occurring. So what I'm referring to here is that we hear this phrase inclusivity being thrown about, that we're very inclusive, that we should be inclusive, that we're having this policy of being inclusive. This is a total lie, because it's actually the reverse. It's inclusive as long as your viewpoints, your beliefs, the way you have worldview aligns with this fixated, narrow, left-wing, woke, dogmatic agenda, and alternative views are not tolerated. Now, regardless of what you think of Barry Humphries and his views, and by the way, personally I regard the whole way that the whole transgender issue has been promoted so much as just another diversion. It's actually a smokescreen from what the real issue is. And the real issue here, which I'll describe now, is that we have a man who is expressing a view. He has a public profile, and his view is not considered to have any merit whatsoever by these certain groups, by these certain individuals. Now, regardless of what your views are on transgender is not the point. Now, at a biological level, from a medical point of view, a medical, physical, biological point of view, a man attempting to change his gender to somehow become female, however you want to phrase that, whatever words you want to use, at a biological level, that there is the view that this person is therefore, quote, a mutilated man, is not considered acceptable at all. That those views of those minority groups should not be heard. They should not have any voice. They should not have any oxygen. Now, I'm not saying that that's my view. I'm not defending Barry Humphries. But what I am drawing attention to is the fact that that argument is not without merits. And yet we see this growing tendency more and more into society to have alternate views or different views or opposing views that don't sit with this manufactured consensus reality, with this extremist left-wing agenda, that those views, those viewpoints, those individual people are just simply cancelled. Their arguments are not even addressed in a logical, coherent manner, and they are not even given any merit at all. Now, logically, if you look at the argument that I've just expressed there, that it's not the only view, that view does have some validity. And yet we are now starting to see that there is this tendency. It's not happened in 2023. It's been going on actually for years, but it's just becoming more and more apparent in ways that we are perhaps getting used to, which is the real concern, that this language, this way of censoring people is now becoming more and more the norm if people have views and opinions that don't align with this manufactured agenda. And you can see clearly in the media when this agenda is starting to come out, because it gets more and more momentum, it gets more and more headlines, it gets more and more attention. Now, I'm not saying, to be clear, anything negative about the Melbourne Comedy Festival or their actions in moving the award of the Barry. I'm going beyond that. I'm talking about the concept itself, that people are now being censored and are being ridiculed if they even have alternative views. And this is under the guise of inclusivity. This is the real issue, that people are using these buzzwords, but this is completely Orwellian, because inclusivity in this inverted reality is the complete opposite. It's the complete opposite. And we're now seeing this with the attempt to change the Constitution and introduce this voice, which is race-based, institutionalized racism enshrined in the Constitution. And that is not inclusive at all. We have a functioning parliament. We have a functioning parliament that represents all Australians. We have a democratic system where all Australians over the age of 18 are able to vote. That is what a functioning democracy is. It doesn't matter what your opinions about that, whether you think that's good or bad. That's basically the voice for all Australians is in the parliament we already have. And to then go and alter the constitution itself to make a race-based subsidiary parliament, whatever term you want to give to it, that's based on race, that's the definition of racism itself. Does that sound inclusive to you? So when you're hearing these words that people are parroting these days without really understanding what they're saying anymore, because people have become so completely indoctrinated and lacking critical thinking, when you hear some of these phrases like inclusivity and diversity, it's actually often the opposite. Where is diversity in a race-based parliament where you can only be one race to actually be appointed into that institution? That's not having any diversity whatsoever. And this is going largely unnoticed by so many people. Thankfully, when it comes to changing the constitution in Australia by referendum, historically the Australian people have been very conservative in this regard, with approximately around 20% of referendums being approved. So therefore 80% actually fail. Personally, I'll be very surprised by the time we get to the actual vote, when people actually start to realise the implications, the Trojan horse effects of this if it goes through, which are very, very complex, which I won't go into now. There'll be plenty more time to discuss that. But the reality is that this Orwellian doublespeak language is a method of always introducing the opposite. And again, whatever the mainstream media is telling you, it's usually the opposite. And I've just given 3 examples, even in this short video, of how this is occurring in the basic treatment of Barry Humphries with the Barry Award, the departing of Tucker Carlson from Fox News, and also the Voice, this referendum that's coming up in Australia. So this is very important, these topics, particularly on a day like ANZAC Day, when we actually celebrate the diggers, the legacy of the ANZACs, and the heroism, the courage that they show, and the bravery in World War One, and the amazing comradeship, and all the things that we celebrate as an egregore, as a collective soul here in Australia. And I have been to Gallipoli. I've been to see what that geography looks like. And those trenches between the Turks and Australians at some places appeared to me to be about 20 to 25 metres, perhaps even less actually. And charging at machine guns that those brave young men did back in World War One is something that all Australians really remember and take pride in, that there was so much courage, heroism, and ultimately sacrifice by these men to defend king and country. And the question that we should all be asking ourselves in 2023 is, what happened to that legacy of the ANZACs? Because many people could easily argue that those qualities, that those men died for freedom, for the freedom of generations to come, has effectively been squandered by a whole new generation of men who have completely failed to stand up for their own families, for their neighbours, for their colleagues, for their friends, in the face of a very overt global tyranny that's unfolding, and at the same time handing sovereignty of our nation over to transnational organisations, organisations such as WHO, the UN, that are governed not by democratically elected officials here in Australia. And this is having major ramifications and implications for our own sovereignty, for the ability for Australia to be a free, independent nation, which is already compromised. The question is, how much is it being compromised? Australia as a nation has fallen. The question is, how far will it fall before the men of this country actually stand up and start to have their voice heard and stop hiding behind this government mandate of actually keeping everyone safe, when clearly that's not what's occurring at all. So today is a day, of recognition of the past, but it's not just about going to a parade or honouring the bravery of these men. It's about honouring it in the sense of the baton being passed to today's generation of men, to Australians of today, as to maintain those values, what those men fought and died for. I mean, they would be shocked at the lack of fortitude and resilience and this inability to acknowledge and see the enemy within in this country, in Australia, if they were alive today. And it's our duty to honour the ANZACs in this way, to actually maintain their legacy by perpetuating their sacrifice. And we have forgotten that, and we have taken so many things for granted as far as freedom goes and our standard of living here in Australia. And it's actually becoming such a problem that we actually have lost our national identity, in the sense that those values are not being replicated in today's generation of Australians. And we are all guilty of that at one way or another. And all I can say is the events for the last few years have been disastrous in what has been revealed as to where the Australian national soul, where the Australian character is actually at today. And we are too easily subdued and pacified and numbed by consumer consumption, by materialism, by our toys, by our sports, by our entertainment, and have forgotten of the legacy that is still within the Australian character, but is greatly diminished. And as far as I can see, that the last few years that these qualities have not been apparent in a majority of Australians, that we have dobbed on each other, that we have basically outsourced our sovereignty to these organisations, that we have not held these unelected bureaucrats accountable, that we have not collectively held the politicians accountable for all of the atrocities that are being committed. And we have not spoken out about this, that we are actually inviting the next level, the next stage of this agenda to be implemented on an unsuspecting, compliant, and very, very weak population. And all I can say in regard to this is that there will be bigger tests and also much greater opportunities to right the wrongs in our own personal failings moving forward. So if we can close the book on this chapter that has transpired, learn the lessons, have some reflection and contemplation on the actions that we took and the ones that we didn't took, the failing that we've had to stand up for our own families, our own beliefs, and just not have our voices heard legally and lawfully, to be clear, that we can write a new chapter. And it's times like today, during ANZAC Day, where we should actually consider those qualities and really think about what those men went through for us to live freely today, or what we perceive as being freely, and to what responsibility we have to maintain that for future generations, because there is an asymmetrical warfare that is unfolding on this planet that is, for the better part, covert, and it is being fought by unorthodox methods with unorthodox weapons by an extremely highly organised and very powerful different organisations to implement this agenda. So what does that mean? That means that we do, in the tradition of the ANZACs, have that responsibility to maintain these qualities, to maintain the freedom for future generations, because I can tell you, in my view already, that generations to come will look back on the last 3 years and be shocked to think that what actually transpired and how people behaved. And if you don't believe me, as an anecdotal story, when I was in India the last time, I actually met a psychotherapist from Germany who was telling me about the major mental health challenges in Germany. And she was dealing with this every day. And she told me that because of the events of what occurred in Germany in the 30s and the 40s, that even today, shockingly enough, many people in Germany had major anxiety and shame and guilt over what previous members of their own family had done in that period of history. So you know what I'm talking about. That because they had acted the way they had, at whatever various level of whatever they did, that generations later were totally ashamed of their own family name and their forefathers. And I was really, really, really surprised to hear that. And she said to me, and I remember to quote her, she said, "Germany is a country of anxiety." And that she was giving me this explanation from cause and effect. It really made me realize that how badly a nation can be scarred at the deep collective subconscious mind, like literally decades and decades later, after those events have completely passed and all those people have also passed. So that's not to shame anyone here in Australia, but it's basically an insight into how we can get it so collectively wrong and how we can be so unaware of how out of alignment our course of action has been. We've all been out of alignment in our course of action at one time or another in our life. That's a given for everyone. And that's why I'm saying that we have the opportunity to write a new chapter, to really start to think about and get involved and not be so blatantly egocentric, and think about the collective of our legacy that we'll leave behind for generations to come, and even just to do a small thing, to play a small part in this taking our country back and having a much more transparent government, accountable government, good government, bureaucrats that are known who they are, who are held accountable, who we can actually see and evaluate their actions, their influence, that they're shaping various policies, agendas, reforms, etc. But if it's all going to go in the too hard basket for it collectively, then we're on that path to have greater overreach with government, greater interference with the government in our life. And we have forgot that the government, that all these organisations, they're there to serve us, that they are public servants, that we pay their wages, and we therefore have a responsibility to hold them accountable, to make sure that we are contributing individually and collectively to maintain the values that the ANZACs themselves fought and died for. And they were young men. They had their whole life ahead of them. And in the name of service and in the name of the nation, as it was perceived, this threat to our freedom, they gave the ultimate sacrifice. And it's something that we should all contemplate, not only on Anzac Day, but think about what that means for us in our legacy beyond the material things that we accumulate that we can never take with us, beyond so-called socioeconomic status and credentials and all these things that ultimately don't define our character and who we are and ultimately what we stand for. So that's something that we need to consider, and how we can lawfully and legally make positive change, not only in the collective, but also obviously in ourselves. So it's food for thought. Thanks for watching. We live in epic times.